I'm a little nervous to tell you my story today. I've always wanted to share these stories with young women and with women in general. I've just never had the opportunity to do it on this scale. My story is one of immense struggle. And my struggle is real. It is intense. It is heartbreaking. It's never ending. My stepfather once said to me, "Christine, it was your lot in life to struggle." I almost felt like this huge burden was lifted off of me. I no longer had to try to figure things out of why all these horrible things always happened to me. It was my lot in life. Start in a period of my life when I started realizing that my mother wasn't who I thought she was. But she was something in my life that at the time I thought I wanted, not what I needed. My mother was never, ever what I needed. I needed a mother, and that was something that my mom could not do for me. And that was very apparent in my teenage years. I started drinking at the age of 12. I started having sex at the age of 12. My mom knew that these were things that I was doing drugs, that I was drinking. Someday I will tell you the backstory of my parents and my stepfathers. Yes, I said fathers, because I've had two. Where this story starts now is with my second stepfather. He was only 19 when my mom married him. I was 13. But at that time, my mother not only lied to me, she lied to everybody about my stepdad's age. She told everybody that he was 26. But let's talk about me at 13. I'm drinking, I'm smoking pot, I'm taking speed, I'm experimenting. I am finding my voice in rebellion. I had always been the perfect child, always trying to do the perfect thing, and it never seemed to work. I watched my mother go through man after man and abuse and abuse. My mom pretty much neglected me all of my life up until this point when she met my stepfather. My mom had a 1973 Corvette Roadster. It was charcoal gray with dark gray pinstriping. And when she met my stepfather, Troy, they decided that they wanted to get involved with the local Corvette club here in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The main focus of the club, of course, is Corvettes. But the second focus is drinking. My mother started bringing me to these drinking parties with adults. Some of these people were in their late 50s, early 60s. I was the only teenager hanging around a bunch of drunken adults. My mother decided that if I was going to drink, she was going to take me with and be able to watch me as I drank. She thought that that would be an effective way of being able to protect me. Instead of trying to get me to stop drinking or to teach me the value of morality, of values, of not drinking, of not doing drugs, she decided to bring me into the world of it, full force. I had a series of boyfriends in high school, and I'm going to start this story when I'm 16. I had a boyfriend from high school that I was with for about a year. And we had been living together because that was another thing that my mom allowed to happen. She let boys stay over, and eventually they just stayed. They slept in different rooms, but they also knew we were having sex. So my mom put me on birth control, and she did that when I was 13. My boyfriend and I, we had a weird relationship. We broke up, we got back together, we broke up, we got back together. Right before Christmas, I ended up meeting my mom at their Christmas party, and I had just broken up with my boyfriend at that time. That night, I was out with a bunch of friends, and my mom told me to come over and hang out with them at this party. And so when I went there, my mother introduced me to this guy named Brian. He was 27 years old, but my mom saw this future with me and him, and she thought that she would try to hook us up. I know it sounds crazy, but this is what I was living with. And at the time, as a teenager, you're thinking, my mom is the coolest mom in the universe. Who else has a mom that tries to set them up with good-looking older guys that have really good money and lets you drink with her? On New Year's Eve of 1984, my mom and my stepdad were going to a huge Corvette party for New Year's Eve and asked me if I wanted to come with. I said, absolutely, sure. So we go to this party, and we're in the basement of one of the members' house in Racine, and we're all drinking. We're just drinking, going crazy, and everybody's laughing and partying and just having a good time. So on New Year's Eve, Brian was there. Brian and I were flirting, we were talking, we were drinking. By the time the party was over, it was a blizzard outside. I remember my mom was getting her jacket on. Her and Troy were getting ready to leave, and I was getting ready to leave with them. Brian then asked my mother if he could take me home. My mom said yes. Go ahead. Brian wasn't driving that night, but we were in a car full of people, and Brian and I were sitting in the back seat, and he began to kiss me, and I reciprocated. When they dropped us off, they didn't take me home. They took me to Brian's place. He took me downstairs, and we started kissing again, and I had decided that I really needed to get home. Brian was drunk. I was drunk. So we got into his truck, and he told me he was going to take me home. Instead, he took a totally different route down by the lake in the middle of a blizzard. Of course, we got stuck. And he took advantage of that situation. He did finally get me home. It was when he dropped me off, when he decided to tell me that he was still in love with his ex-girlfriend, and I was too young to have a relationship with him. And that was it. That was it for me. He used me, and now he was done with me. However, I would not be done with him. 3 months later, I'll find out I'm pregnant. My stepdad was the first person that I told. When I told my mom, I remember sitting in the hallway of our house, I can't remember exactly what we were doing. We might have been going through some stuff in the hallway up to the attic, but I remember sitting in the hallway, and she said to me, "You can't tell anybody that this is Brian's baby." She says, "It will humiliate me. It will embarrass me, and it will embarrass him." Forget about how it would make me feel. Forget about that I was the one that would be seen as the whore. But all she cared about was her reputation and his reputation. I'm 16. I'm still in high school. So my mother decided it was time to bring the ex-boyfriend back in. She told me I had to tell him. She told me that I had to tell him he was the father. We sat at the dining room table and decided that we would have to get back together. And he moved back in. I am not a good liar. I don't like to lie. As I said before, I've always tried very hard to be a good person. Always the straight and forward. That has been who I am since I was a little girl. So to lie on this scale was massive. And hard. I just couldn't handle it. And I finally told my stepdad, I can't take this anymore. I can't do this anymore. It's killing me. And my boyfriend is unhappy. We are not good together. And so my stepdad went to go see Brian and told Brian the truth. I don't know at that time if my mother knew that he went to go tell Brian or not. But I know that when Brian found out, he came to see me. And he told me, I have a life. I can't do this. I can't be a father. He says, I have goals. I'm going to college. I'm in love with my ex-girlfriend. I can't be a father. I was 6 months pregnant at this time. And I stood up with my belly out and I said, I'm 16. I'm still in high school. You don't think that I have dreams? You don't think that I had goals? My whole life will change forever. Anything that I had dreamed of is now gone. My ex-boyfriend left. He moved up north because he just couldn't take the things that were going on between him and I. I was mad and angry all the time. Living with this idea that there was a guy who wanted to be the father, but he wasn't. And I couldn't let him be that because it wasn't right. But he wanted to be. His whole family was convinced that I was pregnant with his baby and that I was lying to him so that I could just break up with him. Trust me when I tell you that this guy spent his whole life wondering if that was his child. So now it's out in the open. Brian's the father. I start going back to the Corvette Club parties. Of course, I'm not drinking, but I am pregnant. And everyone knows it. Everyone knows that I got pregnant by one of their members, a 16-year-old girl. Well, now I'm 17. I turned 17 on May 19th, 1985. So now I'm 17. And everyone knows that he's the father. It had to have been so weird for this group of adults to be surrounded by this pregnant teenager and one of their members. And everybody just pretended like it wasn't really happening. I was quite literally the elephant in the room. And my mom's reputation didn't go down any. Nobody cared. Nobody seemed to care. I was pregnant for 10 months. I got pregnant on New Year's Eve, 1984, 1985. New Year's Day, really, 1985. I had my son on October 8th, 1985. I took off the first semester of school that year. I went to an alternative high school. I like to call it Rock and Roll High. And at this alternative high school, there was actually a daycare. They had a mother's program where pregnant women could still go to school. It was a pilot program at the time and very successful. So they also had a daycare so that these high school women, girls, could continue going to school and get their diploma. But at the same time, they offered up the daycare for classes that students could take to learn home ec, how to take care of a family, how to take care of children. And it was the coolest thing ever because I met so many people who would come in and into my next class and say, oh my gosh, I just played with your son. He's so cool. He's so cute. And I fed him and I did this. And that's pretty much how my last year of high school went. Everyone knew me and everyone knew my son. I was very popular in high school, something completely different than what I was like in elementary school and junior high. A lot of people knew me. I was still the party girl. I still went to all the parties. And, you know, at this point, I just didn't want to go to my mom's Corvette parties anymore. Every once in a while, we'd go to some events and I'd have my son with me. And Brian just completely ignored me and him. And after I had my son, Brian's dad reached out to me and he asked if he could meet his grandson. And I was nervous. I didn't know what to expect. So my best friend, Mary, and I walked over to Brian's dad's house, and Brian still lived there as a 27-year-old man, but he wasn't there at the time. So we brought my son over there, and his grandpa was able to meet his grandson, and he fell madly crazy in love with him. He was really good to him. And he was really good to me. He knew that his son didn't want anything to do with me or with his son, So he took it upon himself to take care of me and to take care of my son. He knew I was still a teenager. And so he took my son from me on the weekends so I could just keep living. He took me out every Wednesday for lunch. He was a really good guy. In Brian's family, everyone hated my son. They really ousted him. But Brian's dad didn't care. The problem is that he really favored my son a lot. He loved him so much. So he would take my son every weekend from me so that I could still be a teenager. The problem is that Brian still lived at home, and Brian wouldn't have anything to do with him. If my son were there, he would walk out of the room or he'd close the door on him. This was after he had told me, after my son was born, that he would be there for me any way that he could. He made me take a paternity test. He took me to court to take a paternity test. It was 99.99999% his. So after he found out that it was his and he had taken me to court as a 17-year-old girl, he came over to the house and he started playing with our son, and he seemed like he was really going to be a good dad. And he said, "I'll do anything for you. I'll take care of you and I'll take care of him. This is my son and I will do anything for him." When paternity was established, the courts called us back to set guidelines for child support. Brian had a very good job. So needless to say, he was going to pay out of his nose for child support. That pissed him off. When we were working with a moderator through child support, and they told him how much he had to pay, he said, "Well, can't Tristine and I work out something together?" Because before this, he was literally giving me $25 a week, which my mom thought was like so great. I mean, she absolutely adored Brian. There's nothing that this guy could have done wrong. The woman at child support, I think she wanted to hit Brian because she looked at him and she said, no, you can't do that." She knew I was a young girl, and she knew that he would probably take advantage of me like he did to get me pregnant and just not pay me what I deserved. And so after that, when child support was determined and set, he never talked to me again. The whole "I'll take care of him and I'll take care of you" ended forever. And any time that our son was over there, he ignored him. He closed the doors on him. He would leave. And my son didn't know anything. He didn't know that that was his father. He didn't know. So he didn't understand. So Brian's dad was so good to us. My son never really had a relationship with Brian. When my son was a teenager, he tried connecting with Brian, and Brian would make plans with him and never show up. And I remember how hard it was to watch him trying so hard. And I took the blame for everything. I could have easily told him the truth. But instead I said that it was my fault. That I was just a teenager and he didn't want to be a father. And I took the blame his whole life. So that he would never hate his father or feel like it was his fault. That his father didn't want anything to do with him. I took it on myself. When Brian's father died, it was really hard on my son. That was the closest thing he had to a father, and he absolutely adored him. They adored each other. And when he died, I really thought Brian was going to start making an effort, and he didn't. He kept making plans with our son and just blowing him off all the time. Several years ago, Brian died in his house alone. And because my son was the only child he ever had, everything was left to him. And the family was so mad. But the family made him pay for everything. They made him pay for the funeral. They made him set up the funeral. My son had to do all of that for a guy who never wanted anything to do with him. This family was so spiteful that that's what they made him do. Brian's sister, who is my son's godmother, got married and had a son. He was a teenager when Brian died. Josh had to put together a memorial photo collage, and every photo he put on that board was of his father and his aunt's son, driving around in the car, fixing the car. Apparently, Brian and his nephew were incredibly close. He was bawling hysterically at the funeral and had the nerve to ask my son if he could have the car that was left to him, the Corvette. He had the nerve to say to my son, he was like a father to me. And he had a father that was standing right next to him. My son didn't have a father. This kid had two. And my son's father was like a father to him, but didn't know how to be like a father to his own son. He paid 18 years of child support faithfully because child support just followed him everywhere and garnished his wages. I was a young girl who was taken advantage of by adults. What happened to me was statutory rape. He was 11 years older than I was when I was 16. I was still a child. He was an adult. And through it all, I was the one that had to grow up and become the adult. Well, he didn't have to take any responsibility as an adult. It's one thing to pay child support. It's another thing to be a father. I was a single mom. I wasn't a bad mom. I was a good mom. I had my moments where I wasn't the greatest mom, but I was young. I absolutely adore my son and adored him when he was born. He doesn't talk to me anymore. I haven't talked to my son in 2 years. That's a totally different story. And it also involves my mother. But that's for another time.